In a quiet little neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other's business, a new family moved in. The streets were lined with perfectly trimmed lawns and flower beds bursting with color. It was the kind of place where people took pride in their homes, and rules were enforced by the Homeowners Association, HOA, with almost military precision. Evelyn Carter, a seasoned police commander who had recently been promoted to lead the city's police department, decided this would be her fresh start. After years of working long hours in the city, she wanted something calmer, a safe space for herself and her teenage daughter, Maya. They'd packed up their belongings, said goodbye to their old life, and made the move. On the day they arrived, Evelyn pulled into the driveway of their new house, a charming two-story home with white shutters and a cozy front porch. The moving truck followed close behind, loaded with boxes and furniture. As Evelyn stepped out of her car, she stretched her arms, breathing in the crisp suburban air. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. Maya hopped out of the passenger seat, her headphones dangling around her neck. She looked around curiously at the neat rows of houses, noting how different it was from the bustling city they'd left behind. "This place is so quiet," she remarked, half-jokingly, but the peace didn't last long. Across the street, a woman peeked through her lace curtains, watching every move Evelyn and Maya made. This was Patricia Whitmore, or as most people called her behind her back, Karen. Patricia fancied herself the unofficial leader of the neighborhood. She carried a clipboard everywhere she went, jotting down notes about rule violations like overgrown grass or cars parked in the wrong spots. Nothing escaped her watchful eye or judgmental gaze. Within minutes, Patricia marched across the street, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. She wore a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Without even introducing herself, she launched into a lecture about parking regulations and trash bin placement. Evelyn listened patiently, nodding along while mentally cataloging everything Patricia said. She assured the woman that they'd do their best to follow the HOA guidelines. Standing slightly behind his mother was Derek, Patricia's adult son. He was tall and lanky, with an entitled smirk plastered across his face. While Patricia talked, Derek leaned casually against a lamppost, looking bored. But when he saw Maya unloading bags of groceries, his expression shifted. His eyes lingered on the organic snacks she carried inside: quinoa chips, almond butter, and expensive bottled water. To Derek, these items represented privilege, and he sneered, muttering something under his breath. Evelyn missed the comment entirely, too focused on keeping things cordial with Patricia, but Maya caught it loud and clear. Her cheeks flushed with anger as she recognized the slur hidden beneath Derek's words. Still, she bit her tongue, not wanting to escalate the situation. Evelyn noticed her daughter's reaction and gave her a reassuring glance, silently telling her to let it slide for now. Patricia finally wrapped up her tirade and turned to leave, satisfied that she'd asserted her authority. Derek trailed after her, throwing one last disdainful look at Evelyn and Maya before disappearing into their house. Once they were gone, Maya let out a frustrated sigh. "Mom, did you hear what he just said?" Evelyn shook her head, though she suspected it wasn't anything pleasant. "No, but I can guess." "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. We're here to build a good life, not get dragged into drama." Maya nodded reluctantly, but the encounter left a sour taste in both their mouths. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. Their arrival had already stirred the pot in ways they couldn't have imagined, and tensions in the neighborhood were about to boil over. As the day wore on, Evelyn continued unpacking, trying to push the unpleasant interaction out of her mind. She reminded herself why she'd chosen this neighborhood: safety, stability, and a chance to raise Maya in a supportive environment. Yet, deep down, She couldn't shake the feeling that living here might come with challenges she hadn't anticipated. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, Evelyn sat on the porch with a cup of tea. She watched the neighborhood settle into its nightly routine, kids riding bikes, dogs being walked, families gathering for dinner. On the surface, it seemed idyllic. But beneath the veneer of perfection, cracks were starting to show. And Evelyn knew better than anyone that sometimes the quietest places held the loudest secrets. A couple of days passed since the awkward introduction with Patricia and her son. Evelyn had spent most of that time settling into the house, organizing boxes, and trying to get a feel for the neighborhood. Maya, on the other hand, was still fuming about Derek's comment. She kept bringing it up whenever they were alone, replaying the moment in her head and imagining all the things she could have said back. But Evelyn stayed calm, reminding her daughter that reacting impulsively would only make things worse. On Thursday afternoon, Evelyn realized they needed more groceries. The pantry was almost empty, and Maya had already complained twice about not having enough snacks. So after dropping Maya off at a friend's house, a neighbor who seemed friendly enough, Evelyn headed to the local supermarket. It wasn't far, just a 10-minute drive from their house. Nestled in a strip mall surrounded by coffee shops and fast food joints. The store was busy when Evelyn arrived, but she didn't mind. She enjoyed grocery shopping. It gave her time to think without distractions. She grabbed a cart and started filling it with essentials: fresh vegetables, eggs, milk, bread, and some treats for Maya. As she wandered through the aisles, she struck up a brief conversation with an elderly man picking out apples. He introduced himself as one of her neighbors and mentioned he'd heard she was the new police commander. Word traveled fast in small towns like this. By the time Evelyn reached the checkout line, she felt a little lighter. Grocery stores always had a way of grounding her, even during stressful times. She chatted casually with the cashier, who complimented her choice of organic snacks. "Those are my granddaughter's favorite," the woman said with a warm smile. Evelyn laughed, saying something about how teenagers could eat endlessly, and the two shared a moment of easy camaraderie. But as she pushed her cart toward the exit, things took a sharp turn. Just as she was loading her bags into the trunk of her car, a voice called out behind her, "Hey, hold on a second." Evelyn turned around to see Derek striding toward her, his usual smug expression firmly in place. He looked ridiculous in his designer sunglasses and expensive sneakers, like he thought he owned the parking lot. "What can I do for you?" Evelyn asked politely, though her tone carried a hint of caution. She closed the trunk and crossed her arms, ready to end the interaction quickly. Derek stopped a few feet away, pointing at her groceries. "You've got stuff we need?" he said bluntly, as if it were a fact rather than a request. "Hand over some of those bags." Evelyn blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Excuse me?" "My mom's hosting an HOA meeting tomorrow," Derek continued, ignoring her confusion. "She needs supplies for it, and you've clearly bought too much. Give me a couple of bags and we'll call it even." For a moment, Evelyn just stared at him, processing what he was saying. Was this guy serious? Did he honestly think he could demand someone else's groceries based on nothing more than entitlement? She glanced around, noticing a few shoppers lingering nearby, watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed amused. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said finally, keeping her voice steady. "These groceries are for my family. I don't have extras to spare." Derek scowled, clearly not used to being told no. "Come on, lady. Don't be difficult. You're new here, you don't want to start problems your first week." His tone dripped with condescension, and there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes. Evelyn recognized it immediately, the same look she'd seen countless times. In her career, usually right before someone tried to intimidate their way out of trouble. That may be true, Evelyn replied coolly, but stealing isn't exactly a great way to avoid problems either. Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Derek flinched, caught off guard by her directness. For a split second, he looked uncertain, like maybe he'd underestimated her. But then his arrogance kicked back in. With a huff, he reached out and grabbed one of the grocery bags from her cart. "Fine, I'll take this one," he snapped, clutching it tightly. "Consider it a donation to the neighborhood." Evelyn moved faster than he expected. Before he could step away, she gently, but firmly placed a hand on his arm. "Put that bag down," she said, her voice low but firm. There was no mistaking the authority in her tone. It was the same tone she used when dealing with unruly suspects or volatile situations at work. Now, Derek froze, startled by the sudden shift in her demeanor. He hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was paying attention. Sure enough, several bystanders were filming the confrontation on their phones, capturing every word and movement. One woman even whispered to her companion, "Is that the new police commander?" "I think it is." Realizing he was losing control of the situation, Derek reluctantly dropped the bag back into the cart. "Whatever," he muttered, stepping away with his hands raised in mock surrender. "Keep your stupid food. Not like anyone cares anyway." Evelyn watched him retreat, shaking her head slightly. She finished loading her groceries into the car, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Confrontations like this weren't uncommon in her line of work, but experiencing one so personally and so publicly was unsettling. Still, she reminded herself that staying calm and composed was key. Losing her temper wouldn't help anyone doubt as. She drove home, Evelyn replayed the incident in her mind. Something about Derek's behavior bothered her more than she cared to admit. It wasn't just his audacity or sense of entitlement. It was the underlying hostility, the thinly veiled disdain that seemed to simmer beneath the surface. She wondered how many other people in the neighborhood had dealt with similar run-ins with him and his mother. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be the last time she crossed paths with the Whitmores. When Evelyn pulled into her driveway, she noticed a group of kids playing basketball in the cul-de-sac. They waved at her as she got out of the car, and she smiled back, waving in return. Despite everything, there was still a warmth to this community, a sense of connection that made it worth fighting for. Evelyn resolved to stay vigilant, knowing that standing up for herself and for others was part of what made her who she was. Little did she know, the real drama was only beginning. By the time Evelyn finished unloading her groceries and settled into the quiet rhythm of her evening, she had already decided how to handle what happened in the parking lot. She wasn't someone who let things slide not when it came to fairness or respect, but she also knew better than to act impulsively. Years of experience as a police officer had taught her the value of patience, evidence, and timing. So instead of stewing over Derek's behavior, she took action. The first thing she did was check the security cameras in the grocery store parking lot. Most stores these days had them installed for safety reasons, and sure enough, the manager confirmed that the entire incident had been captured on video. Evelyn requested a copy of the footage, explaining that it might be relevant to an ongoing matter. The manager, recognizing her from earlier conversations with customers, handed it over without hesitation. Back at home, Evelyn reviewed the recording. It showed everything. Derek approaching her car, his demand for the groceries, the way he grabbed the bag, and her calm but firm response. There was no mistaking the aggression in his body language or the dismissive tone in his voice. Even though she hadn't raised her own voice during the exchange, the power dynamic was clear. He thought he could intimidate her because of who his mother was, and he didn't expect her to push back. Evelyn forwarded the video to her deputy chief at the precinct, along with a brief summary of what had happened. She made sure to include details about Derek's attempt to take her groceries and the racial undertones in his comments. She wasn't looking for special treatment, far from it. As the police commander, she wanted this situation handled by the book without any appearance of bias. That meant letting others investigate if necessary, even though she could have easily dealt with it herself. With the evidence secured, Evelyn turned her attention to Patricia. She figured it wouldn't take long for the woman to find out what happened in the parking lot. Sure enough, within an hour, 2 uniformed officers arrived at her doorstep. Evelyn opened the door to see them standing there, looking a little unsure of themselves. They shifted awkwardly, glancing at each other before one of them finally spoke. "Ma'am, we received a call about an altercation involving you at the grocery store," the taller officer said, consulting his notepad. "Mind telling us your side of the story?" Evelyn smiled faintly, stepping aside to invite them in. "Of course," she said, gesturing toward the living room. "But before we get started, I should probably introduce myself properly." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her badge, holding it up for them to see. "I'm Commander Evelyn Carter. I run the precinct downtown." Both officers froze, their expression shifting from professional detachment to mild embarrassment. Clearly, they hadn't been briefed on who they were visiting. The shorter officer cleared his throat nervously. We weren't aware, ma'am. Sorry about that." "No need to apologize," Evelyn replied smoothly, motioning for them to sit down. "You're just doing your job. Let me tell you what happened." She walked them through the events in detail, starting with Derek's approach and ending with him retreating after she stood her ground. She kept her tone neutral, sticking strictly to the facts. When she finished, she handed them a flash drive containing the security footage. "This should clear things up," she added. "Feel free to review it and share it with whoever needs to see it." The officers exchanged another glance, clearly impressed by her composure and preparedness. After thanking her, they left, promising to look into the matter further. Evelyn watched them go, feeling satisfied that justice would be served if there was anything to serve, that is. She doubted Derek's actions warranted criminal charges, but at the very least, the truth would come out. And sometimes that was punishment enough. Meanwhile, across the street, Patricia was pacing furiously in her living room. Her phone buzzed constantly with updates from Derek, who had called her immediately after storming off from the parking lot. According to him, Evelyn had humiliated him in front of everyone, refusing to give him the groceries and then calling the cops on him. Never mind that he was the one who initiated the confrontation, it was always someone else's fault and his. Whirled up, Patricia clutched her phone tightly, her knuckles turning white. How dare Evelyn embarrass her son like that? Didn't she know who they were? The Whitmores had lived in this neighborhood for decades. They practically owned the place, or at least that's how Patricia liked to think of it. This new family, with their fancy job titles and organic snacks, was ruining everything. Fueled by indignation, Patricia dialed the precinct once again, demanding to speak to someone in charge. When the dispatcher politely informed her that Commander Carter was unavailable, Patricia launched into a tirade about corruption and favoritism. "She threatened my son," she shrieked into the phone. "She stole food meant for charity. You people better do something about this, or I'll go straight to the mayor." Her dramatics fell flat, however. The dispatcher assured her that the matter was being investigated thoroughly and advised her to wait for updates. Frustrated but unwilling to admit defeat, Patricia hung up and began plotting her next move. If the police wouldn't listen to her, then maybe the rest of the neighborhood would. Over the next few hours, Patricia worked tirelessly to rally support for her cause. She sent text messages to fellow HOA members, exaggerating the details of the grocery store incident to paint Evelyn as a villain. She claimed Evelyn had verbally attacked Derek, accused him of theft, and even threatened legal action against their family. By the time evening rolled around, whispers about the disgraceful new neighbor had spread throughout the community. But Patricia underestimated Evelyn's reputation. Word of her position as police commander had already circulated among the residents, and many found it hard to believe that someone in such a high-ranking role would behave recklessly. Some neighbors dismissed Patricia's accusations outright, while others promised to reserve judgment until they heard both sides of the story. As night fell, Evelyn sat on her porch, sipping a cup of tea and reflecting on the day's events. She knew Patricia would try to turn the neighborhood against her, but she refused to let fear dictate her life. Instead, she focused on building genuine connections with those around her, the kind of relationships that couldn't be shaken by gossip or lies. Just then, a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor she'd met in the produce aisle, standing at her gate. The woman held a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic wrap, her smile warm and inviting. "I heard about what happened today," Mrs. Thompson said gently. "Thought you might need a little pick-me-up." Evelyn accepted the gift with gratitude, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That means a lot." Mrs. Thompson waved off her thanks. "Don't pay too much attention to the noise around here. We've all got our quirks, but most folks are good at heart. Just give them time to get to know you." Evelyn nodded, feeling a renewed sense of hope. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she wasn't alone. With strength, patience, and a little help from her neighbors, she could weather whatever storm Patricia and Derek tried to stir up, and deep down, she couldn't help but feel a small thrill at the thought of seeing their faces when they realized exactly who they were dealing with. The next morning, Evelyn woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her bedroom window. It was a peaceful start to what promised to be anything but a peaceful day. News of the grocery store incident had spread like wildfire through the neighborhood, thanks in no small part to Patricia's relentless campaign of misinformation. By breakfast time, Evelyn could already feel the weight of whispers swirling around her. She wasn't surprised gossip was practically a sport in places like this, but she refused to let it get under her skin. Maya, on the other hand, was fuming. Over cereal and orange juice, she vented about how unfair the whole situation was. "Mom, seriously, why does that woman think she can just make stuff up? Everyone knows Derek started it." Her voice carried an edge of frustration that only teenagers could muster. Evelyn sighed, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I know, sweetheart. But people hear what they want to hear, especially when someone they trust says it. We need to stay calm and let the truth speak for itself." "But what if they don't believe you?" Maya pressed, her brow furrowing with worry. "What if they side with her?" Evelyn reached across the table and gave her daughter's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Then we'll deal with it. Trust me, I've faced worse than HOA drama. This is just another challenge, and we'll handle it together." Later that afternoon, Evelyn received a formal invitation to an emergency HOA meeting. Patricia had called it specifically to address the grocery store fiasco, as some residents were calling it. The note was typed neatly on official HOA letterhead, complete with a list of rules Evelyn supposedly violated during the confrontation. She read it with raised eyebrows, half amused and half annoyed by Patricia's audacity. "Well, looks like I'm going to a meeting," Evelyn said. Aloud, showing the letter to Maya. "Want to come along?" "Could be interesting." Maya wrinkled her nose. "No thanks." "You're braver than I am." Despite the tension brewing, Evelyn decided to attend. She figured transparency was the best approach. If Patricia wanted to air her grievances publicly, Then fine Evelyn would do the same. Before leaving, she printed copies of the security footage and witness statements from the parking lot. Just in case, the meeting took place in the community center, a bland room with beige walls and rows of folding chairs. When Evelyn walked in, all eyes turned to her. Some faces were curious, others skeptical, and a few downright hostile. Patricia sat at the front, clipboard in hand, looking smug. Derek slouched beside her, arms crossed, glaring daggers at Evelyn. Patricia stood up as soon as Evelyn entered, tapping her pen against the podium to call the room to order. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "As many of you know, we have a serious issue that needs addressing. Our neighborhood prides itself on harmony and respect, yet Commander Carter has disrupted that balance with her aggressive behavior." Evelyn took a seat near the kidamba back, folding her hands in her lap. She listened silently as Patricia launched into her version of events. According to her, Evelyn had verbally attacked Derek, accused him of theft without cause, and even threatened legal action all over a simple misunderstanding about groceries meant for charity. Patricia painted herself as the victim, claiming Evelyn's actions were damaging the neighborhood's reputation. When she finished, murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few heads nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Then, much to Evelyn's surprise, one of the neighbors raised their hand. It was Mr. Patel, an older man who lived 2 streets over. He cleared his throat nervously before speaking. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, addressing Patricia, "but I saw the video from the parking lot. It doesn't look like Commander Carter did anything wrong. In fact, it seems your son tried to take her groceries and didn't like being told no." Patricia's face flushed red, and she stammered, clearly caught off guard. "Well, that's not relevant." "The point is, it is relevant," Evelyn interjected, standing up. Her voice was calm but firm, cutting through the tension in the room. "If we're going to discuss this, let's stick to the facts." She walked to the front of the room, pulling out the flash drive with the security footage. "I brought a copy of the video, along with statements from witnesses who were there. Would anyone care to see it?" The room erupted into murmurs again, this time louder and more animated. Several neighbors leaned forward, eager to watch. Patricia sputtered protests, but Evelyn ignored her, inserting the flash drive into the projector. Within moments, the screen lit up with the footage from the parking lot. Everyone watched silently as Derek approached Evelyn's car, demanded her groceries, and grabbed a bag without permission. They saw Evelyn calmly asking him to stop, then standing her ground when he refused. There was no mistaking the aggression in his tone or the dismissive way he treated her. When the video ended, the room was dead quiet. Patricia broke the silence first, her voice shrill and defensive. "This is ridiculous. My son was only trying to help our community. Clearly, Commander Carter doesn't understand how things work here." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Evelyn replied, turning to face her. "Your son tried to take something that didn't belong to him, and when I said no, he threw a tantrum. That's not helping the community, that's entitlement." Derek finally spoke up, his face twisted with anger. "You don't belong here. You're ruining everything." His words came out harsh and laced with hostility, drawing gasps from the audience. Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she looked directly at him, her expression unreadable. "Son, let me make something very clear. If you ever speak to me or anyone else like that again, I'll personally ensure your name ends up on the precinct's watch list. Understand?" For a moment, Derek just stared at her, stunned into silence. The threat wasn't empty. It was a promise backed by years of authority and experience. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone. After the video played, the mood in the room shifted dramatically. Neighbors who had initially sided with Patricia began questioning her account of events. One woman stood up, addressing the group. "Honestly, I've never liked how Derek talks to people. He's always been rude, and now we see why. Maybe it's time we stopped excusing his behavior." Others chimed in, agreeing. Even those who hadn't witnessed the parking lot incident admitted they found Derek's actions troubling. Patricia grew increasingly agitated, snapping at anyone who dared challenge her narrative. But her support was crumbling fast. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Evelyn had won, not because she sought victory, but because she presented the truth. As the crowd dispersed, several neighbors approached her to apologize for doubting her or thank her for standing up to Derek. Evelyn accepted their words graciously, knowing that rebuilding trust would take time. Patricia stormed out of the room, dragging Derek behind her. Her face was pale with fury, and her clipboard trembled in her grip. For the first time since moving in, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this neighborhood wasn't beyond saving after all. As she drove home, Evelyn reflected on the day's events. Standing up to bullies wasn't easy, whether they wore uniforms or lived across the street. But every act of courage mattered. And sometimes, shining a light on the truth was enough to change the course of an entire community. The fallout from the HOA meeting rippled through the neighborhood like a stone dropped into still water. By the next morning, everyone had an opinion about what had happened, and most of them weren't favorable to Patricia and Derek. The video footage Evelyn had shown at the meeting had done its job, exposing Derek's behavior for what it was, entitled, aggressive, and disrespectful. While some residents tried to defend him out of loyalty to Patricia, the majority couldn't ignore the evidence staring them in the face. Patricia, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. She doubled down on her narrative, insisting that Evelyn had manipulated the situation to make Derek look bad. Her phone buzzed nonstop as she called everyone she knew, spreading her version of events like wildfire. But this time, her usual tactics didn't work. People were tired of her drama, and many started avoiding her calls altogether. Even longtime friends began distancing themselves, whispering behind closed doors about how toxic she'd become. Derek, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the backlash, at least outwardly. He strutted around the neighborhood as if nothing had changed, headphones dangling from his neck, acting like he owned the place. But beneath his bravado, cracks were starting to show. Neighbors who used to tolerate his antics now glared at him when he passed by. Kids playing basketball in the cul-de-sac deliberately ignored him when he tried to join their game. And at the coffee shop where he liked to hang out, baristas took noticeably longer to serve him, exchanging knowing looks whenever he complained. Evelyn noticed the shift but chose not to dwell on it. Instead, she focused on repairing relationships within the community. Over the following days, she made a point of introducing herself to more neighbors, striking up conversations during walks or while checking the mail. She listened patiently as people shared their concerns about noise levels, parking issues, even the lack of proper lighting in certain areas. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered. Slowly but surely, Evelyn earned their trust, proving that she wasn't just another authority figure throwing her weight around. She genuinely cared about making the neighborhood better. One afternoon, while chatting with Mrs. Patel, the elderly neighbor who had spoken up at the meeting, Evelyn learned something surprising. Apparently, Derek's bad behavior wasn't limited to grocery store confrontations. Several residents had filed complaints about him over the years, ranging from petty vandalism to verbal abuse. Some claimed he'd keyed cars parked near his house, while others said he'd bullied younger kids at the park. But no one had ever taken these reports seriously because Patricia always dismissed them as misunderstandings or outright lies. This revelation troubled Evelyn deeply. She knew firsthand how unchecked entitlement could escalate into something far worse. As a police commander, she'd seen countless cases where small acts of aggression spiraled into violence. Determined to address the issue responsibly, she assigned detectives outside her direct chain of command to investigate Derek's past conduct. She wanted the process to be transparent, ensuring there was no room for accusations of bias. Meanwhile, Maya found herself adjusting to life in the neighborhood too. At first, she struggled to connect with kids her age, many of whom seemed wary of crossing paths with Derek or earning Patricia's disapproval. But after the HOA meeting, things began to change. Parents encouraged their children to reach out to Maya, impressed by how gracefully she and her mom had handled the situation. Before long, Maya was invited to join a group chat for local teens, where they planned weekend hangouts and school projects. For the first time since moving, she felt like she belonged. Back at home, Evelyn continued working toward larger goals. Inspired by the challenges she'd faced, she organized workshops aimed at promoting cultural sensitivity and fostering inclusivity, not just within the neighborhood but across the entire city. These sessions brought together officers, residents, and community leaders to discuss topics like implicit bias, conflict resolution, and building trust between law enforcement and civilians. Her leadership inspired both participants and colleagues alike, reminding everyone why they'd chosen careers dedicated to serving others. Despite Evelyn's efforts, Patricia remained stubbornly resistant to change. She refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing on her part or her son's, doubling down on her belief that Evelyn was ruining the neighborhood's character. To her, character meant maintaining strict control over every aspect of life here, from lawn maintenance schedules to acceptable snack choices. Anything, or anyone, that disrupted that rigid structure was deemed unacceptable. Her attitude only deepened the rift between her family and the rest of the community. Invitations to neighborhood gatherings dried up, and invitations to holiday parties disappeared entirely. Once popular block parties became quieter affairs, with fewer decorations and less enthusiasm overall. Residents joked privately that maybe the Whitmore's absence was actually improving morale. As weeks turned into months, tension simmered down significantly. Evelyn's steady presence helped restore a sense of calm and unity among neighbors. People started talking again, not just about HOA rules or property values, but about real issues affecting their lives. Friendships formed, block watches strengthened, and community spirit blossomed. Even so, Evelyn never forgot the lessons learned during those early days. Standing up to bullies wasn't easy, whether they wore designer sneakers or carried clipboards. But doing so sent a powerful message. Respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you earned. And sometimes, shining a light on the truth was enough to spark meaningful change. Late one evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch watching fireflies dance in the twilight, she reflected on how far they'd come. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she felt hopeful. Together, she and her neighbors had weathered a storm and emerged stronger for it.